I'm Amanda.
Hi, I'm Kat.
Hi, I'm Matt. Hi, I'm Mike.
And together, we are Breck's Natural Resource Management Team. Today we're out here at Manchac Park off of Old Jefferson Highway, and we want to take you for a little tour around some of the trails that we have out here. We have several different kinds, and it's a great neighborhood park with a lot of different amenities, so come on in. So one of the really great things about this park is that we have several different types of trails that you can choose your own adventure on. So at this junction that we're at, you can either go left and go onto a nature trail. And a nature trail in the Breck system is a little bit wider. It's typically going to be covered in limestone and is going to have more amenities. So think about Bluebonnet Swamp Nature Center, Blackwater Conservation Area. There's benches and interpretive signage, things like that. So we have a short nature trail at Manchac that loops around over to where our future Blue Whale launch is going to be. And then if you wanted to go right, you would go to our primitive hiking trail, which is going to be fewer amenities, a little bit narrower. It's going to have a dirt bottom, and it's going to have directional signage on it. So you can either go a little bit further into the woods and have a real, more intense nature experience, or you can stick with the limestone path and have a nice little friendly jaunt in the woods.
Yeah, so here we are at Bayou Manchac. This is where Manchac Park gets its name from. The word Manchac is believed to have come from a Choctaw word, imashaka, which means the rear entrance. Historically, Bayou Manchac was connected to the Mississippi River, and it was even a shorter route from Baton Rouge through Bayou Manchac to the Gulf of Mexico. In 1699, when Bienville was exploring the area, the Native Americans showed him this bayou in this shorter route. Over time, it was attempted to make this as a shorter route from Baton Rouge to the Gulf of Mexico, but it proved to be difficult due to the spring floods, which would create log jams, and it was hard to maintain. During the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson eventually plugged it at the Mississippi River to prevent the British from using this bayou. And with the construction of the levee along the Mississippi River, it was eventually completely dammed, preventing the Mississippi River from flowing into Bayou Manchac.
So in our bayou area, you will find some of these guys. So this is an apple snail. They were introduced to Baton Rouge in around 2016 after that flood. So these guys were an aquarium species that were released out into the waters, and they spread really rapidly. So they put out these eggs that you'll see along the rivers. So they look like little bubble gum. Whenever you find these eggs, you do have official permission to scrape them off, preferably into the water so other things can eat them, because if you do just scrape them on land, they do still have a chance of surviving. And if you see these big guys, you can crush them. Alrighty, so since these guys are introduced and have taken over our waterways so much, that makes them considered an invasive species here. So that is why we want to get rid of them as much as we can, because they're not native.
So this is a wonderful native species that you can find out here at Manchac. This is called elderberry. Its scientific name is Sambucus nigra. And this is a species that likes to grow out in disturbed areas and along the edges of habitat. It's actually a really popular plant for cold remedies and medicinal purposes because the berries are high in antioxidants, so people can make syrups and jellies and gummies as a cold preventative. It can be confused with another plant called pokeweed that is not edible. So anytime that you forage or eat from the forest, make sure you know what you're picking and that you are aware of what you're eating. So this is a small example of pokeweed, and this is the elderberry lookalike. Now when this plant gets much larger and a similar size to elderberry, and when these flowers mature on the ends, they will be these big black glabrous berries. that look very appetizing but are not.
Right now we're in that zone between Bayou Manchac and the upland habitat of Manchac Park. This zone regularly gets water when Bayou Manchac rises. A couple tree species that you find in this habitat are located right here. For example, this is one you often see in this area, is the sycamore tree. This one in particular we call the Three Sisters because of the three trunks that you can see going up into the canopy. Another tree species that we find in this habitat zone is box elder, right here. Box elder is in the maple family, and again, it's often seen in that transition zone between the bayou and the uplands. So ways to identify a sycamore tree are by its leaves, which have this large leaf with kind of three kind of lobes like this. Another way is by these kind of seed balls they produce, which are similar looking to sweet gums, but this is a little bit different. Another way to identify a sycamore is by the bark. So as you can see, the bark flakes off. There are several theories as to why the bark flakes off like that. One theory is that by shedding its bark, it doesn't allow insects to burrow underneath and cause disease to the trees. Another theory is that sycamores shed its bark like this because it lacks that elasticity that other trees have. And so for it to grow bigger, it has to shed its bark like this.
So a really beautiful flower that you can find in the forest at Manchac that we see consistently here is the swamp leather flower. This is actually in the Clematis family. The scientific name is Clematis crispa, and it's really beautiful. These are actually not even petals. They are 4 large sepals that are connected together to create that, and they have a very interesting texture, which is where it gets that name of leather flower. They come in a variety of different colors. This one's kind of tinted a purplish blue. They can also be tinted pink in color. They'll die back in the winter and come back every year, but this is a great native alternative for your garden as well, instead of a non-native flowering vine that you want to creep up a trellis. So it's always good to know these different native alternatives and keep your eyes peeled because they're a cute little treat to find growing along the edge of the trail.
This is a awesome example of one of our native species. This is actually a southern pecan. Southern pecans are in the hickory family. The scientific name is Caria illinoinensis. These trees can be identified. They're unique from other hickories that they have this really flaky tan bark, and they have these long lanceolate leaflets. This is a very tall tree, so we can't see a lot of the leaves, but these have about 10 to 12 leaflets, and that's a characteristic. And they also make what they're famous for, which is the actual pecan. And this is a native species to Louisiana, and this is the kind of pecan that you eat. And these can be foraged and made into pies and all sorts of delicious stuff.
What's that you hear screaming at night? That is gonna be this cicada. So these guys have 2 different varieties, some that come out every 13 years and some come out every 17 years. So these guys actually live underground as larvae, and then they emerge out of the ground to climb up these trees and produce that scream you hear, which is their mating calls. So they only live for a very short time, so they have to take advantage of that time and produce these big, big sounds to attract each other. And then they will lay their eggs in the tree they're in, and once those eggs hatch, they go back underground and the cycle restarts again. So they have this body part called a cymbal, and they flap it around, and that's what makes that crazy, crazy loud sound. So the reason they shed their skins, this is actually going to be the nymph exoskeleton. So this is what they looked like as a baby. So in order to get their full-grown adult exoskeleton, they have to shed this one off, which will show their new, bigger skin.
This is another great native species that you can find in our forest. This is a rough-leaf dogwood, Cornus drumundii. It's an understory mid-canopy species that does produce small white flowers. It's very attractive. This is the bark of the dogwood. This is a leaf, and these are very kind of rounded with a tapering tip with lateral venation. But one of the interesting things is called the dogwood test. And when you break the dogwood leaf in half, you can see, if you can, there are tiny hairs connecting the venation there. And actually you can see it kind of hangs there, but that's one of the ways you can test to see if what you're looking at is a rough leaf dogwood. And of course the leaf is slightly rough. It does produce berries, it is forage for birds and other species, and it's a really interesting tree to see out in the woods.
So at Manchac, you will find a lot of reptile species, including snakes, which I know is a common fear of many people, but I do want you to know that these guys will most likely always run away from you. We are big and scary, and they are so small, so they will always run away. The two most common species we have here are going to be the ribbon snake and the broad-banded water snake. So the ribbon snake you will find mostly on terrain, so on the terrestrial ground away from the bayou. But the broad-banded water snakes you'll find in the bayou itself. So these guys are both non-venomous, so they cannot kill you.